Awareness, the final frontier. These are the explorations of Jonathan Robinson and Brian Tom O'Connor. Their continuing mission, to discover fresh new paths to the mystery within, to seek out new joys and new methods of awakening, to boldly go into the heart of expanded consciousness. This is Awareness Explorers.
Well, welcome, Awareness Explorers. We are back with another exciting session of How to Awaken to Awareness. And once again, we have a spiritual teacher of some renown to be our guest and to answer questions from his perspective. So I'm very excited to interview Stuart Schwartz. I actually know very little about him, so I will be asking the beginning questions of what are you doing and what are you up to? But my friend Brian Tom O'Connor actually has known Stuart for a while, so I think I will have him introduce him more formally.
Thanks, Jonathan. So let me give you a little background of Stuart and then a little info about how I first encountered Stuart Schwartz. So Stuart Schwartz is a spiritual teacher who gives satsang around the world, as well as personal sessions in the non-dual tradition. Stuart started out as a teacher of the Sedona Method, but then met his teacher, Robert Adams, who taught that we are already that which we are seeking, the self, and was a disciple of the great 20th century sage, Ramana Maharshi. Stuart is the author of the book, The Great Undoing. So I first met Stuart many years ago when all of us non-duality fans, we would go to this huge loft on Great Jones Street in the East Village to hear all the teachers who'd come through New York regularly. Do you remember that, Stuart?
I certainly do. It was another life, wasn't it?
It was. That was a great place. I think the neighbors complained because they stopped hosting.
Yes, it often happens that way.
But then you came to town regularly at a bunch of different venues and One Spirit Interfaith and different people's apartments on the Upper West Side and in Jackson Heights. And actually, you even had your own Upper East Side apartment where you used to give sessions for a while.
That's right.
And I'll never forget, it was in that Jackson Heights apartment that, Stuart, you first taught me and all of us the self-inquiry, or who am I technique of Ramana Maharshi. And I also remember one of the most powerful experiences of my life was a retreat you held in Sedona, Arizona, at your beautiful home there. So I'm so glad you could join us, Stuart. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian. It's very nice to be here.
I'm happy to hear, Stuart, that you were a teacher of the Sedona Method. I actually have studied the Sedona Method and the release technique for several years, so that may be a whole question of inquiry. But I want to start with just knowing a little bit about how you work in terms of satsang. Not all of our listeners might be familiar with that term, but I know that that's an important part of what you do. So I'm wondering if you can define the term and then maybe say a little bit about what makes your satsang unique.
Well, to begin with, satsang is unique because it's not like anything else that you can think of as far as meetings go. Because usually in a meeting, there are agendas and themes and different levels of people, the president, the secretary, somebody's taking notes. There's usually an agenda. There's usually some kind of outcome wanted, and many times arguments on both sides, so that everything I just mentioned is absent in satsang.
Does it have you say it doesn't have an agenda, does it have a goal in mind or a hope in mind as to what will be experienced in satsang?
Not even that. It's a given, you see, Jonathan. Mm-hmm. It's a given because the whole meeting is focused on people who are honoring that which they are before they know themselves as anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So all identification with I am this person and I know something and I'm going to learn more, that may be on the minds of some people if they're new to satsang. But basically, people that come to satsang realize that they're there to honor that which is usually not honored at all. And what they're honoring is their awareness of the existence of being.
How do you talk about that? How do you enter into that conversation?
Well, the first thing you do when you come to satsang is follow the ancient tradition of taking your shoes off. That's what you do first. So you're not coming well heeled on any level. You're coming in, leaving the pavement and the world behind. And you're sitting in just a very easy, relaxed state with the idea of being yourself, which is really leaving behind all ideas of true and not true, relaxing out of it. So we talk about going into silence, meditation, but also the awareness of being is always here. So no matter what you're doing, that's the purpose of being there. And then you relax into it.
Would you be the main person giving satsang, or do you have people in the quote audience also in the satsang position?
Well, usually it's a circle, and they're coming to my home usually if it's in Florida. So I guess you could say I'm the one giving satsang. If you need a term like that, that's the way you would say it. Yes. Is that clear, or is there something unclear?
It's becoming more clear to me. Now, Brian has had the experience of being in satsang with you, so he might have something to add or ask as well.
Yeah.
Well, I just feel that being together in a community with a teacher, especially one you've spent time with, so that I've seen Stuart many times and often the same people attend over time, that the community develops and that there's a certain energy that you feel when you're in it, that you get not only from Stuart, but from everyone around. So it's kind of a collective thing. And I guess that dovetails in with, I guess, what the traditional Sanskrit definition or translation of satsang, which some people translate as gathering in truth.
Which is a perfect way of saying it. Shorter. Thank you. And to answer Jonathan's question, how do you get people to be in that state of oneness or awareness of being? I think that you use some words to explain, like you were saying, being in truth, meeting truth, but the mind is what we're leaving actually in satsang, the thoughts, the recurring thoughts one after the other. And so you appease the mind somewhat and then kind of leave it alone. But that's not to say that if the group comes in happy and rowdy, so to speak, that we don't join in and start satsang that way. You see? Sometimes it's like we don't go into direct meditation and silence. We just joke around. But the whole purpose of being there is for the oneness. So that develops on its own, happens by itself. Sometimes somebody will come in and they'll have a question and it's urgent. So that's how it starts. Right in, zap, there it goes. What's going on here? I can't find myself because this is so large, this issue that I'm going through right now. So it all depends on the exact moment that you're, sharing it.
I was with a specific spiritual teacher for 25 years in which we did satsang, our version of satsang each week.
Yes.
And I was often amazed at the effect. It's very powerful. What do you think is creating that magic? Is it a group intention? Is it the teacher? Is it, it always struck me as like, what are the ingredients here that allow people to relax into beingness? And how can we maybe even duplicate that outside of this formal gathering?
Well, it's a very good question. One is wanting to go into yourself very deeply rather than amplifying the personal side of yourself. You see, you
Yeah.
cannot bring the self into your life and sprinkle it with everything that you want. But if you have the intention to going deeper into yourself, it always responds, and the collective group makes it even stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And I might point out that everyone is already that which we're seeking. It's always there in every human being. And I'm talking about people that don't seek at all what the ultimate truth is of their being. It's there. The problem is we have been taught, trained, and conditioned to look to the individual and to condition the individual to be successful, happy, through a prescribed way of seeing life and a prescribed way of doing things. And that is very, very thick. And sometimes, most of the time, most people don't want to touch that or leave it.
Mm-hmm.
So already the people that are coming to satsang know that there's something bigger and that they're not going to effort or try to change their lives in ways to find the happiness their way, but rather test the waters like a leap of faith to go into themselves rather than the world
Mm-hmm.
for solution.
So I've always been curious about then what to bring. For example, as you mentioned before, some people start with a burning question, often about things that are happening in their life, but sometimes about how to approach the self. So I've always wondered whether or not to bring up issues in my life or just ask questions. Like, for example, you mentioned that some people have issues that might interfere with the seeing of our true nature. And I'll give you an example. In my own self, I often have a hard time letting go of the desire to be safe. For example, say from getting into trouble, say from the fears of life, fears of bureaucracy, fear of anxiety, fear of criticism. And that sometimes interferes with choices in life that I might otherwise make. Is this the kind of question that is leading us away from knowing our true nature and into our ego, or is this something that's helping us see the obstacles to seeing our true nature?
As far as I'm concerned, I wish you had brought it up sooner. I think that whatever feels strong and real for the person and whatever's up is most important to look at,
Mhm.
you see. And I would say that when we're acting as an individual, which most people are seeing themselves as the center, me, the world, subject, object, and everything is then broken down into a duality of good and bad, safe and unsafe, like you're talking about. It's just everything is seen that way because I am separate, I am a solid person, so is everybody else. This is all the belief. So that when you are turning your attention off that into oneness, into the pure awareness of being, duality stops. So that the person is having a question, like you're saying, of fear of what could happen to me, you see? And I want to take some kind of steps to change that. How do I make myself safe and not have fear? And I don't know. I've tried so many things. And what we really learn is that you cannot talk yourself out of fear. It's like telling somebody that's afraid, or a child, don't be afraid. There's nothing to be afraid of. You see, you're safe. Sounds good, but it doesn't work. But from the point of view of oneness, where the duality of safe and not safe doesn't exist, there's just the pure awareness of watching, then the lack of safety can be received, seen fully for what it is, and allowed. The person is experiencing this deep lack of safety. And I understand. The self understands this and accepts it, absorbs it even, dissolves it. It does what the person cannot do, would like to do, would like to banish it. But usually what we do is just kind of suppress it. And then it's still active. It still arises every time the stimulus of bureaucracy doing this or the fear of that, whatever it is, you see. So does that answer your question?
Yes. So when these fears arise, we experience them fully. We don't try to get rid of them, but we experience them from the self, that is, the universal self, or the background of awareness, which allows them to be exactly as they are.
Yes. And the thing is, you see, logic goes only just so far.
Mm.
We're so used to being logical people, figuring things out, having a plan and taking action, that we think that to be ourselves is emulating sages and saints who are pure and open and always happy and sitting in a position where nothing ever bothers them. So we might try and emulate that as a person, but we are not there. And emulating just goes so far. So if you just actually allow the feeling to be present and go to it, even if you're not in the state of oneness yet, but if you allow yourself to go to it and explore it, and you are the explorers, the awareness explorers, so you go to it and you look at it and you try and be as objective as you can and you stay with it. But don't make it into a thing where if I stay with it long enough, it'll disappear, although it might, you know, but you just stay with it. Sooner or later, what I have discovered is that rather than reaching for the height of awareness, starting from the dark and the fear and going into it will reveal great openings.
So, Stuart, you said that going into feelings, negative, especially, or positive as well, is a great service. Obviously, a lot of people don't like to do that, but what do you see as the value of doing that in terms of awakening to awareness?
Well, you already are awareness. And anything that you believe, positive or negative, obscures it. That's it. So we go towards the light because we think that's more the self, but actually that's obscuring it also. Because I'm holding on to what I like, or things are going well, so I don't have to, really look at what's going on. I want more. I want to hold on to the good, and I want to push the bad away, or blame somebody for stirring it up.
Yeah.
Which is what we do as a society. They caused it, and you have to realize that, for example, many people look at anger as something that, you can't do it at the workplace. It's not considered a good feeling, so you suppress it. And if you share it too much, it causes a lot of problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there it is. What do you do with it? What do you do with anger, frustration, and rage, and all the rest of that? What's the choices?
Well, there's resist it, suppress it, cathartic it, or be with it.
Exactly. And sometimes even all of that, and it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm suggesting that you use it because a lot of times the darkness is trying to protect you from something even deeper than that. And since we stay away from the darkness, we don't delve too deeply. It goes underground, gets stirred up again. It's a constant stream. And
Mm-hmm.
all of it is obscuring your awareness, your full awareness being yourself. All of it. So if you actually do look into the darkness and you allow it and you really get inside of it, it'll start to open up and really reveal a huge awareness of yourself. It's very
Mm-hmm.
powerful. Except most people don't want to do that. And since I know that it was so helpful to me, I keep the groups kind of small, intimate, living room style so that everybody feels as safe as they can physically and emotionally. And whatever comes up, whatever is there is allowed to come up.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's off limits.
Do you also give your students or the people who show up at satsang any methods or things to do during their day-to-day life?
It happens. It happens, but I wouldn't say there's a general rule book of do this and not do that, and not really. There are some themes that might happen, you know. There are some techniques that I'll use for a time, and then I'll seem to forget about them.
So it sounds like they're based more on the person and the thing that they're going through at the time.
Yes, and there are other things that come into use also. For a while there, a couple of years ago, I was seeing the value of watching the breath, really focusing in on watching how the life force works very acutely, paying attention, because I discovered that when you take your attention fully off your own mind and the thoughts, or even the desire or the effort to be still and yourself, that if you focus on something completely free, that which is giving you life, it will bring you into the awareness very quickly. So I was really focusing on that a lot. Not so much now, unless it's pertinent.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other things that I would use also. Anything to see how you're benefiting from something you're really not benefiting from. Why we hold on so tightly to things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You mentioned that a certain type of group, a small, intimate group, was beneficial to you at an
Yes.
early stage. And that made me curious about how this evolved for you in your awakening or in your early stages of spiritual growth.
I always found that working with other people in a small group, either one-on-one or a small group, always felt more safe and more caring and more pertinent. I've given many groups, especially in the beginning, to large groups, and it becomes more like a lecture.
Hmm.
And it's not, it's not really very personal, except if it touches a few people. So I would rather have a group of people that want to be reached and feel very safe than just have a large crowd to talk about the beauty and the value and the joy of beingness.
Mhm.
Because we know that, that's a given. What is obscuring it? And why are we holding on to what we don't want? That's what intrigues me, because we're holding on tightly, very tightly to what we don't want, so we don't lose it, because we identify it as us. And to be not that, well, then what am I? See, I'm not just talking about in the satsang. I'm talking about when you leave it and you're not in the safe environment and your shoes are on and you're in life and things come up. What do you do then? So in a way, what I'm trying to do is show people how they are always that, always. And by turning to it, it reveals itself, always reveals itself. And then that is meeting what the person is trying to change and mold into something else. And it's completely radical, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Being that which you are, allowing everything to be as it is, not that it should be different. Yeah.
And even if I'm feeling bad or anxious, or I've noticed that the joy of awareness is there anyway, even while I'm feeling bad or angry or anxious or upset. So there's less of a desire to say, oh, don't feel that way. Just notice what else is already there that's okay with feeling that way.
And it's not you.
It's
It's just energy arising that we're giving a story to. It's my feeling. It's my deficit. It's not. It's old stuff coming up. It's energy. And we don't have to take it so personally. We do, but we don't have to.
right.
I mean, we do until we don't.
Yeah. Now, I know you were a teacher of the Sedona Method for a while,
Yes.
and it
Good
sounds
long
like,
time.
yeah. So it sounds like you either are no longer teaching that, or that it's just a smaller part of what you do. And I'm wondering how that happened, and whether you still recommend the Sedona Method, or how it has evolved over time.
Well, I taught the Sedona Method for many years, maybe 10, 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't taught it for at least 20 years. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been about a long time. And I'll talk to people about the method. If people are really not in touch with their feelings, or I feel like they could use it, I would recommend it. I suppose what happened was Robert Adams moved to Sedona in the late 90s, 70, 96, I believe it was. And a group of us from the Sedona Method went to see him, because he's a living yoni, completely free. And here I was, a teacher, showing people how to be free by letting go of negative thoughts and emotions and conditioning. I really specialized in conditioning. And the Sedona Method didn't really go into conditioning as deeply as I wanted to. And then here I am, a teacher who's helping people. And the very first time I saw Robert, I saw that he said, "You think you're so smart," not to me individually, but to the group. "But really, if you knew nothing, you'd be smarter." And you think that by doing something, you're going to get free. And that is what keeps you from going free, because you are already free, believing strongly, and I can't emphasize how strong it is, that you are something else trying to be free. And that really struck me. It kind of like put an axe right through all this helping and all this letting go of this to get that. Because when you do let go of something, the awareness comes up. So it appears like that's what's causing the freedom. But in truth, you're overlooking the fact that the freedom is before you know your name. It's before all identification. It's before all thoughts. It's before all your conditioning. But since we're so logical and we're taught to be logical, we think we have to get in there and fix everything and change things and let things go. And to a certain extent, if you didn't do that, you wouldn't even be aware that there's this whole reservoir of beingness underneath. And so it just completely changed my whole way of looking at helping people and showing them to deal with one thing after the other. You have to start from the knowing that you are free. If you have to badger it into your head so you crack through the thick skull that I am somebody, knowing something, doing this to get there, you have to keep telling yourself, no, I am free right now. Until the mind stops resisting the very idea of it. And then the work can start.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. You're starting from a different place in a way than the Sedona method, which is starting with, say, your negative emotion and thought and trying to let go of it. Here you're starting from the obvious freedom that's always there. And then if things come up, then you can look at them.
Then the self meets them, not you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because the self doesn't have a judgment that they're wrong or that they should be changed or modified. It meets it as it is. This
Mm-hmm.
is what's here. Look at the character believing this. Look at the character suffering. Look at the character wanting to get out of the suffering. Look at all the effort. And all of those things are going against all the spiritual principles that everybody knows. Don't be the doer, but I'm doing to get better. It's logical. How do you stop doing? How do you stop? How do you allow the self to meet it? You can't answer that,
Mm-hmm.
but you know it. And I suppose you could say you allow it. And then you start to see, Jonathan, all the patterns that the conditioning is locking the person into, all the belief patterns that really don't want to be tampered with. You know, we want to be free, but we'd really like to be me free, not absent of the stuff. I want to be free to do whatever I want. I want to be free to feel totally at home wherever I am. But I don't want to really let go of how I see myself, whatever that is for the individual.
Mm-hmm.
What can you do?
It's
You
very
can't
tricky.
make somebody want to be free. That has to come of their own accord,
Mm-hmm.
you see. And I suppose if you ever realize yourself that if the suffering gets too acute, then maybe you do something about it. If you can handle it moderately well, you'll stay with your own method of doing it.
So it is very tricky because I've noticed a lot of people define or think of letting go as being synonymous with getting rid of something. And that's not what you're talking about.
Glad you point that out because that happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I've also discovered, and I'm sure everybody can relate to this, as much as we try and change things by letting go or becoming more proficient or more this or more that, it only lasts for a while. The whole game we're playing is very temporary. That's another idea that we don't want to look at at all. But true change really only happens from the inside out. Because you find yourself one day realizing that that which was really irksome to you is no longer there. Something shifted inside. It kind of like got pulled apart. Sometimes you can actually feel it. You can feel yourself opening inside and all the tightness and all the holding just kind of opens, and you're different. It's not willpower. It's not, I'm going to make this happen. It's just like a miracle, as far as I could see it.
Hmm. When that miracle happened to you, it probably shifted how you were with negative emotions and the stuff of life. I'm wondering if you can talk about what that shift was like.
I wouldn't say shift, Jonathan. I would say shifts, thousands of them.
Hmm.
Small ones, big ones, probably ones I didn't even notice. You see? We want radical shift. We want awakenings. I've had many of those. You have too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, now I've got it. And then it fades. But it's like constantly coming back, turning back to the self, until your awareness of yourself as that takes over. And then it's easier to go even deeper. I don't think that it's just a huge awakening happens and you're free. Maybe for people who've done it in another life. Like Ramana, he did a lot of work. And then one day, a blast of awakening that never stopped. Well, you don't hear much about that. Most of us are plugging away, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
I'm very glad to hear you talk about that, because most of us think of and hope for and dream for a future event called enlightenment or awakening.
Yes.
And the very idea that it's some big thing that's going to happen in the future takes us away from the present, what's happening right now, which seems to me where happiness and joy actually live.
Yes. And awareness of who you are happens only in the moment. If anything is obscuring it in the moment, then that's more important than the freedom. If you're allowing it to obscure it, you want it more. So if you are completely open in this moment, you can say, I am self, I am free. This is the truth. Right this moment, I am free. It's not to negate that there's more conditioning running or more beliefs that you're holding, but in this moment, I am clear. This is true. Very powerful. Takes it out of the future.
Hmm.
You mentioned that Robert Adams, your teacher, was very good at helping people pass their conditioning. And I'm wondering if there's anything for our listeners you could say that, we're all brainwashed, conditioned in various ways. What helps to unravel that, or what do you see might be useful to see past that conditioning?
I don't know if I said that Robert helped with conditioning, because he was so beyond conditioning that it didn't make sense to him, that we
Mm-hmm.
thought it was so real.
Mm-hmm.
He would make fun of us, actually. Hold up little toys, mirrors with noise, saying, you think you're so smart. And then he would make the silly sounds. And he would say, if you really did not know in this moment anything, you'd be spiritually wise. We know too much. Personally, with conditioning, the more you use the inquiry and you go into what's being held, the more you see how you're holding on to themes very strongly. So many people that you meet in the spiritual circles are holding on to not feeling good enough, unworthy. And so you start investigating them openly. Start looking at the value of holding on to things that obviously aren't serving you. Because there is a value. We perceive a value in it, you know? And if you really hold on to that conditioning strongly as the truth, it leads to lives that are geared to avoid those things or to turn them into very kind of debilitating ways of being. Like, for example, if you were neglected as a child, neglect becomes a huge issue in your psyche, and you may turn into somebody that completely neglects yourself. It twists
Mhm.
around. So it becomes a real problem. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like seeing how, even though conditioning doesn't really make sense, it's counterintuitive. You have to really investigate the value of it and allowing it to exist the way it is as best you can. Like befriending that which you don't want. Very
Mhm.
powerful.
That's helpful. That's helpful.
Really allowing and befriending, because all of that is very tight and judgmental that it's wrong. And as long as we're holding the tightness, we're squeezing ourselves out of our own awareness internally, not just in the mind and externally, but internally.
I love that statement. We're squeezing ourselves out of our own awareness. That's a powerful statement.
I didn't even realize I said it. I said
Maybe
it for you, Jonathan.
Yeah, I got it. I wrote it down.
And now you're beaming.
Yes.
maybe it
Yes.
wasn't even you who said it.
Maybe not. Then who said it?
Everything said it.
Thank you.
I'd be happy to give you credit for it anyway.
That's quite all right.
Do you think now would be a good time, Stuart? If we were wondering if you might lead us through a very short guided meditation.
Okay, sure. So get comfortable. Sit comfortably. And close your eyes if you feel more comfortable in meditation with your eyes closed. And look to see first if anything was said during this interview that stirred up a feeling in you. Something perhaps that didn't sit right or you didn't agree with or didn't match what you already thought was true. See if something arises that you have an issue about. And if it does arise, if there is something, see how you feel about that. Does it stir up an emotion? Upset? Frustration? Misunderstanding? And see if you can just allow whatever is there to exist as it is. Do nothing about it. Let it have its own voice, its own feeling. And just take a nice deep breath. Good. And now look inside your whole body. Scan your body for any holding on, any tightness, any rigidity, any sense of being forced, locked, any holding at all. And if there is any of that, it will reveal itself to you. And again, See if you can allow this tightness to exist. Notice if there's any push against it, and see if you can retreat from that push. Notice if there's any other holding, tightness or squeezing in the body. And see if you can bring your attention to that and explore it. And join it. Like if you really look, you might notice that there is a pulse that's inside the holding. And if you can find this pulse, see if you can follow it with your awareness. And stay with that following. Follow it back and forth. Sometimes there's kind of a jagged kind of a movement with anxiety, perhaps. And see if you can just follow the awareness of the jaggedness. Wherever it's going, you stay with it and join it. And notice if it gets softer and more open. And would you allow it to disappear and fade out and soften so you can relax more deeply into the self? And notice if there's anything at all going on in your head as far as thoughts recurring, anything that's taking you away from being totally at ease and relaxed and open. And whatever is going on, thought-wise, that's taking you out of this moment, can you lose interest in that for the moment? Would you lose interest in it? Would you allow yourself to turn away from thinking and trying to do anything about it, whatever thoughts are occurring, if there are any? And now let's gently turn our attention to the life force, that which is giving us life moment to moment to moment, that which our life depends on. So very gently put your attention on where the breath is coming from. What is going on before you take the next breath? Have an interest in how this all happens. And as the breath finds you and enters, follow it inside yourself and watch how it's operating, as if you could go in and see it filling your lungs. And then notice how when it's ready and finished, it just leaves by itself. And then notice that empty space, wide open empty space before the next breath. What's going on there? And then notice how you find yourself breathing in again. And watch the whole pattern over and over and over again. How brilliant it is, giving you fresh life. And then leaving, right on schedule. Stay with that for a while. And you might want to add on the words I am. I on the in-breath and am on the exhale. To yourself as you're breathing, to acknowledge the truth of who I am. I am this freedom in this moment. And this breath gives me the awareness of existence directly. Breathe in I and exhale am. I am. I am. And stay with that. And feel the openness of the life force and your awareness of pure existence. Free. Totally free.
I think that's a good stopping point before we fade off into complete merging with the universe. That was a great meditation, Stuart. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything you want to add, Brian?
Well, the only thing I would add is to say thank you, Stuart. I'm so grateful that you were here to talk to us and our listeners about the universal self and to guide us there. So I'm grateful. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure. And nice meeting you, Jonathan.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure to know you and be able to interact and get these statements and your sense of beingness, which is certainly transmitted.
Thank you. My pleasure.
How can people find out about you, Stuart, and the work that you do?
Well, they can go to my website, satsangwithstuart.com.
That sounds good. And your book is called The Great Undoing.
Yeah.
So to our fellow explorers out there, we hope that you got some of what you need, some of the transmission. And as always, keep exploring.
Keep exploring. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, everybody out there. Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or your favorite podcast app. And we'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.
We're in a unique situation that you know a lot about, Stuart, and I know almost nothing. So between us, we should have everything covered.
That's right.
So, Jonathan, you know we're all one, right?
Yes.
That's what you said.
Absolutely.
So what more do you need to know?
I think that pretty much covers it. So we won't really have any questions. We'll just look at each other.
Whatever you want. It's your show. And in the meditation, it's okay to be silent? You want to go
yes.
Yeah?
Sure. The only thing I would say is for you to let us know when it's over. so that we don't...
Yeah, Brian, we've been
No, it's never over, Brian.
Yeah, right.
Did you see what they were doing? They were knocking on the glass.
Oh, who was it?
It was somebody air blowing the garden outside.
Oh.
This is not part of the meditation.
It seems like we're hitting a crisis point, but it seems like we've been going downhill for a while, so maybe we haven't hit bottom yet.
That's what Lester always used to talk about.
Yeah.
Hitting bottom.
Uh-huh.
And then when you hit bottom, and then you start your trek back up again.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Do we have to hit bottom? Or is there a way we can escape that?
You hit bottom a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a distant memory.
Yeah.